You see these trees here in these yards? There were no trees. Now, these old houses had their roofs because they were tile, but the fences were down. All these chain link fences were tore up. All these nurseries were flat to the ground. And this area is where, I don't remember exactly where, but where they called it Mount Treshmore, where the FEMA trucks brought all of the debris from wherever they were picking it up and piled it, God knows how high. They parked bulldozers up on the top of it. And the smell was horrible. I mean, it was like living next to a sewage plant. And a lot of houses are no longer here. This house on this corner was still here, but it had lost its roof. Many things have changed, but the normal before Andrew was all these trees. But it looked like someone had just plowed the ground and the trees were gone.
When we finally get to Florida City, Carlos Guerrero, the photographer of the Herald, and I, we're just flabbergasted by what we see, because this is the residential section. Behind the stores is mostly residential, and if everything wasn't flattened, it was just badly demolished. It was gutted. Power lines were down, of course, everywhere. Trees, tree branches, I mean, everything. I mean, one of the interesting things about Andrew was that it was a very fast-moving storm. So even though it was raining, it wasn't, we didn't have to worry about storm surge and things like that. But the winds that were there were incredibly powerful. It just moved quickly, and so that, I think, it could have been a lot worse. But I'll never forget my image of the trees that were standing. The storm headed west. So the trees that were standing were all like looking west. They were all tilting, and their like leaves were even in that direction. And it was such a weird sight, you know? So like all the trees were gone. The ones that were remaining were all looking to the left in some weird like plea for like, let me hold on, you know? So people start coming out of this rubble, and they're shell-shocked. You know, they thought they were going to die also, and they had no idea what was going on. And they lost everything. They lost, you know, unlike me, I didn't lose where I lived. They had lost all their belongings. And they were just coming out and just talking about how scared they were. And, you know, it was everybody okay, talking to each other. Had anybody died? What were they going to do now? So there was that sense of panic. And I'll never forget the iconic photograph that Carlos took. Was of this older man, rail thin, and he steps out with a little bundle of clothes and a little rain jacket that went to his. It was such a great photo because it captured his fear and bewilderment, and he was speechless, like he couldn't even talk.
One of the first things I see on 152nd Street is a troop of baboons. There are baboons running down the middle of Coral Reef Drive. Some of them are bloodied, some of them you see have been hurt. And I'm thinking to myself, this is surreal. This is a real Twilight Zone moment because we don't have any baboons at the zoo. So where did these baboons come from? They're actually macaques, but these primates, these macaques going down the middle of the road. And then I realized the University of Miami had a primate lab right next door to the zoo. And that's where they must have been. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if all these macaques are out, what's going to happen at the zoo? Animals must be out everywhere. I finally get to the zoo, and one of the first things we did was we had a team together. We call it the shoot team. And the first thing they had to do was go out with rifles and check to make sure that there were no dangerous animals out. You know, our number one obligation is the safety to the public. I mean, and that's the bottom line. People think, well, we're a zoo, our number one obligation is the animals. Well, in a crisis like this, no. As we went out, the team went out, thank goodness, all of those poured concrete, welded metal night houses were able to keep the animals safe and keep them contained. One of the most memorable experiences for me during that period was we had to get our koala into safety because the koala was in the koala building, but there was no power. Koalas need air conditioning. They need climate control. They're going to be in danger. I'll never forget this because we had a gentleman come in, say, is there anything I can do? I have a private plane. And I said, yes, I need to get this koala to Busch Gardens in Tampa. We packed this koala in a small sky kennel. I got in a small little Cessna plane with him, and we flew up to Tampa. I remember dropping the koala off and then turned right around. And I've taken that flight from Tampa to Miami many, many times. But this was surreal because I remember driving back, it had already become nighttime. And as you're driving down, you're driving across the state, all of a sudden you see the lights come down along the coastline and they just stopped in South Dade. It was like the state ended right there.
I think it was 7 in the morning when they told us it was safe to come out. And we came out of the lockers. One thing I don't remember that my sister reminded me is that they gave us cheese to eat for breakfast. I don't remember that. I just remember, let's just go home because my dad stayed home to take care of the house for the storm. And so when we left the campus, we saw a lot of trees down. Everything was down. It was a disaster. At that point, there was it's as if the world had stopped for us. And it took probably, I would say, an hour to get to Homestead. We took the turnpike. It usually takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but it took so long because, of course, anything that was left, that was standing before a tree, a sign, a pole, everything was down. There was nothing left standing. So can you imagine, you go back home, there's no landmarks, there's no trees, there's all the houses that are there are destroyed, or they're not even the same color they were when you left because even the paint was ripped off. So there's nothing you recognize when you get back home. And so the only thing we were waiting for was for my dad to come out of the house. That was the only thing, and he did. When we parked the car, we looked, and he opened the door, and that was the best moment because all my family was safe, and no one had gotten hurt, thank God. Even though he stayed home, taking care of nothing because everything was destroyed. Of course, we had a curfew. We had to be in our homes by a certain time. There was a lot of looting going on, which was also scary because now you have no security. If you didn't have any doors or windows, then anyone can crawl in and take what they want. I remember we had to go to Harris Field, which was one of the recreational areas. They were set up there. The National Guard was set up there. They were giving water, any shelter. If you completely lost your home and had nowhere to stay, they set up tents. They set up cots there for everyone. And it was a little scary because I thought, we're going to have to stay there. If we can't find anywhere to go, we're going to have to stay in the tent city. And I remember a lot of the restaurants that were around, especially McDonald's, they were just giving away free food. They were trying to get rid of whatever they had left or saved from the hurricane. And I thought that was pretty nice. But the lines just to get food or water or ice, if you were lucky enough to get ice, you had to stand in the hot sun for hours just to get a burger or just to get a case of water.
I remember standing right here. One night we were sleeping out here in the front, all on pallets. I remember being right here and actually waking up and seeing soldiers standing over us. And they said, "We're just here to protect you. It's okay. Go back to sleep." And I went right back to sleep. That moment I will never forget. It was like what I imagined being in a war zone, something like that happening. That was the closest I got to it. But I felt protected.
The soldiers that made up Charlie Company were primarily from the Homestead area, Redlands, that area down there. A few made it up to Kendall, but just like any other National Guard unit, the soldiers that make up the unit are usually from around that basic area. So when we're driving down, as you can imagine, soldiers were in the back of deuce and a halves or trucks back in those days, and they were looking and seeing all around them as we were driving south what the destruction was. And as we got further and further closer to Homestead, you could just see more and more and more of it. It was very difficult. At one point, we had to yell to the soldiers to sit down, because I think maybe the surprise, maybe the shock of what they were seeing, they started standing up in the back of the vehicle, looking around while we were traveling down the road, which is of course something we had to, it's a safety hazard to them, but you could just see the shock in their eyes when we got down there. I think that the characterization that people have used before of that maybe a bomb went off is pretty accurate. The entire areas that you couldn't recognize. There were places where entire houses were gone, pieces of houses, things were tossed everywhere, trees destroyed. I mean, there's places you couldn't access immediately because they were blocked off. I remember shopping malls on the way down, strip malls and stuff, totally gutted. And yeah, it really was. Based on my deployment in 2003 to Iraq, where there was some significant combat in Ramadi, there was areas that looked just as bad after some of the explosions and some of the destruction that happened in those cities. So I think that characterization that people have used in the past is pretty accurate. There was looting going on, and one of the first things we did was to provide that support to the police to stop that. And then from that first evening on, providing traffic control points where we tried to keep people out of the streets and keep people in their neighborhoods and secure in that way. But yeah, we started providing food, water, MREs to people that were in need almost within a few days of everything starting. But I think, honestly, the worst part of that whole experience for me as a young officer in charge of 100 men was trying to deal with the soldiers themselves, and not that they were doing their jobs. It was the human aspect of that. I had one or two soldiers break down crying because they'd be asking me, here I am giving stuff to these people, but who's taking care of my family?
We started going through the paper ordeal, and I noticed. Then there was weekly meetings at FEMA, and I would go out there and I would notice that the backlash from other cities and the county with having to do all this paperwork. They fought it tooth and nail. Why should we have to do this? And why, you need to do this. And it was very, very antagonistic. And I took a different approach. I said, okay, what do I have to do? What are the steps I got to do? You got to fill this out. You got to fill that out. You gotta do this. So we started doing that. We started submitting. We just inundated them with paper. And they seemed to love it. And the first check that was cut from FEMA here in Dade County came to the city of Miami. We got a check for like $500,000. And then the other municipalities were saying, how come the city of Miami's getting this and we haven't gotten anything? And they said the city of Miami went through the process. They filled out all the papers. And I think part of it was because I didn't know any better. I hadn't been in that part of the bureaucracy. I was a firefighter and that type of thing. And I was used to following the directions of what the higher-ups said. They said, do this. Well, we went and we did that. And so while I was with the city, I continued with that process up to the point that I retired in 1999. So for 7 years, I was involved with it. Then it passed off to a fellow that was in the team with me. When you talk how long a process this is when you have a big hit like that, it's years. It's not measured in a month. This getting back to normal is not a quick thing.
This is the street. House. You can't even see the street for all the trees down. Look, there's no leaves. There's a little bit of grass.
You couldn't walk. We wanted to find out if people were okay, and we couldn't even walk to the other side of the neighborhood to check on folks.
As fast as things grow down here, the trees stayed bare for a long time. We came back in our little minivan and started trying to get debris out. We started to get our furniture, anything that we could save. Most of the furniture was wet.
You were right the first time. It was debris.
Debris.
Threw away half of what we pulled out of there.
It took us a while to find the camera, so we didn't get to take many pictures. We didn't think it would be.
That's right. Most of these pictures were like 2 weeks later. We stayed in that minivan. 3 or 4 years later, when we traded it in, the guy in Atlanta couldn't believe how bad it smelled. So,
It was from the hurricane.
It was from the hurricane. They didn't understand that up there, but you couldn't get the smell out of the car. And the hurricane had a distinct smell, a mildew, old furniture, debris smell that cannot be duplicated.
So we all put our insurance company name on the house, so hoping that if an adjuster rode through the neighborhood, for USAA in our case, he would spot the house and say, oh, this is one of my people, I need to stop here. And because we couldn't live in the house anymore and we all had landline phones, we went and got a cell phone and we put our cell phone number on there.
That's how you could tell hurricane people. They were all walking around with a brick telephone.
Well, I ran into someone at Publix a day or so later, and I'm carrying the phone with me, and he said, you must be homeless too. That's the cell phone is a sign of the nouveau homeless. Christmas time, we went to visit family in Birmingham and Atlanta, and we're now in a setting where there's no debris, no damage. People are living a normal life, and we thought, our kids really need something like this. It just confirmed that we weren't going to be here any longer. And we moved to Alpharetta, Georgia. And we've been in the same house for 25 years.
Our house was destroyed. Everybody's house was destroyed. Our business probably fared better than most businesses. You know, it took me 4 weeks to get it back, but that's what I worked on. That's all I had nothing. We've always been self-sufficient, no matter what happens. We had plenty of fruit to eat. We didn't have any meat or anything like that, but you can get along, you know. You just do what you got to do. And as things were starting to get cleaned up, and after a week or two, we could drive. We actually could drive into town or drive to Florida City. And a lot of church organizations would set up, we'll call them a soup kitchen, but they were serving more than soup. You go, you get a nice meal, they'll serve you breakfast, and we had dinner. You know, they could take it to go. The community came together, not with just government helping, but churches and stuff. No matter what denomination you are, you go in, you know. The government sent a National Guard around to make sure everybody was okay in their Humvees. And we tell them, we're fine. Go find someone else who needs help. You know, we had no problem. But it's just, you do what you got to do. Human spirit's tougher than anything.
This is an aerial shot of our property before the hurricane. This is a shade area, shade cloth over. We have benches there and bonsai trees over here. And so my mother, it's my daughter. You can see the bonsai trees. And so close up a bonsai tree, a pine tree. My father's hobby was bonsai trees. So when we came here, he was a businessman for Mitsubishi, but also he bought this property and started a bonsai nursery. Beautiful trees, and some of them he imported. He brought them back from Japan, and they were $100, you know, for a little 5-inch tree. Everything was just destroyed with Andrew. Just all those things that we had for years and years, 30 years, are just nothing. We didn't have the nursery anymore, so my husband at the time, and you know, we were not really, our marriage was really breaking apart. He went on the bandwagon with all the other pirates, we called them, and started laying carpeting and doing construction work. And so our marriage really went down the tube because he was always out drinking and going, you know, working on homes. And I got the divorce in 1998, and I met another man, and I remarried in 2004. And so now, I'm finally, I'm starting to feel like it's like the Japanese lotus, the Buddhist lotus, ugliest seed stuck in the mud, popped out, and then blossomed into a lotus. I feel like that lotus flower. I'm finally feeling back to normal after Hurricane Andrew.